Okay, so good evening and welcome to 40 Days Bible Study number 185. It is April 1st, 2025, and we're looking at Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and 22. God willing, we'll get through them both. This is our 59th Matthew study. We're looking at a paragraph, a new section of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus starts with speaking about anger. Verse 21, you've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. We're beginning this part of the sermon where there are 6 apparent upgrades of instructions that were given to the Israelites. Now, we need to know that these aren't actual upgrades. That's why I said they were apparent upgrades, okay? They're not actual upgrades because they are clarifications of the spirit, common S, spirit of the law. When we use that term, the spirit of a law, what we're talking about here is the original intention of the law. Because oftentimes a law can be given to people, but people will ignore it, or wicked people will ignore it, and they'll twist it to suit what they want to say. What we do here at 40 Days, we do not twist the word, at least intentionally. We don't twist the word. We don't take what other people say just as taking it for what they say. We do research it to confirm yes or no if what they're saying is accurate. Okay? Now, here's an example of it. The legal speed limit on the highway is 100 kilometers per hour. Okay, that's the law. 100 kilometers per hour is the speed limit. Now, if a person drives at 40, such a person is obeying the law, but that person will be a danger to others on the highway. In that case, he's obeying the law, but he's not following the spirit of the law. Where the spirit of the law is, on a highway, you may travel more quickly. But even though you're traveling quickly, don't cross this limit. So I hope you all get that. The spirit of a law means that we're trying to encourage a certain thing, but here's your limit. Or we're trying to discourage certain things, so we put a limit. Don't go close to it. Now, this verse starts the part of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus addresses aggression. This whole paragraph, 21 to 26, is aggression towards others. Notice how he does it. He starts it with a reference that they know. You've heard it was said to those. So you've heard, they know this already. He starts with a reference that they know, then he expands and expounds on it. This is the pattern that we actually use when we deepen our knowledge of topics. We start with areas that we know, and then we move on to expand what we know into new territory or deeper territory. All right? We start with the familiar, we establish a common base, and then we go into the unknown. In looking at the first paragraph of Meyer's commentary, I want you all to see this, okay? Meyer's commentary is here on the side. I want to show you all why it's hard to do this sometimes, okay? So let's just read a little bit of Meyer's commentary. It's like a long commentary for this one. It's not always this long, but this paragraph was especially difficult to read. There now, follow on the end of this, I can't even read it right, sorry. There now, follow on the end of the chapter 6, neither 5 nor 7, antithetic examples of the fulfilling of the law of Jesus, not merely derived from the Decalogue or from its second table, but from the Pentateuch generally, not, however, of an antinomian kind, consequently, not in opposition to the divine law itself, but opposed indeed to all the manifold limitations and one-sided apprehensions and applications of the same. I'm not going to read anymore. I'll stop right there. If you could follow anything I was saying there, your brain is like super tuned in, and like your ability to read and understand or listen and understand is amazing. Okay? I'll translate what that says. All of that was to say that what continues in the Bible are examples that make Jesus' law appear to be in opposition to Moses' law. Even though Jesus' law is in conformance to the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, the opposition is not because of a mentality, the antinomian mentality, where grace saved us so we can do what we want. The apparent opposition is to the legalistic adherence without the heart to serve the one who made the law. That's what that whole paragraph was saying, not just the piece I read, the whole paragraph. I am sharing this with you to remind all of us that we need to make the effort to study and read, and we need to try to understand sometimes in little pieces at a time, if necessary, study pieces of what's available to us. And yes, sometimes we have to leave stuff, come back to it at some point, because it may be too difficult to follow in the present moment. I personally had to read this for a long time to translate it in parts. And then I came back to it 2 different days to check it and adjust it, because the first time I read it, I didn't do it properly. These commentators are saying a lot of important stuff, but we do need to be able to read it to understand and follow. Okay? Even the word itself and the meanings of the words, we need to follow those too. All right? The pulpit commentary says that Jesus' work at this point, calling the work of the Pharisees excrescences. He did. The way he spoke about the Pharisees' work, he described them as excrescences. An excrescence is a diseased outgrowth in plants, an abnormal diseased outgrowth in a plant. Pulpit said that it was natural for the people to hold on to parts of the law. We could understand that. We hold on to what we remember, we hold on to what we like. That's why people cherry pick the Bible. But the Pharisees took it further because of their narrow and biased focus to corrupt the use of the law in society. And Jesus was going to cut this diseased abnormality out for the law to produce proper growth in its place. He used a very nice analogy of a plant with a diseased growth, which was the Pharisees' teaching. Jesus was going to cut that out and let the natural growth of the law with his improved explanation and guidance help it. Many commentators talk about the whole section in their work on this verse. So it is time consuming to do this verse. All right. A lot of it is difficult because while I'm looking at the commentaries for 21, a lot of the commentators talked about the whole section and they just continue talking about it. So there is a lot here. And as you'll see, we're going to get to the bottom of it. When we read, you have heard, it was said to those of old, you have heard. It's a simple term, but it's very deep. Okay, it's very deep because when we read that, it's telling us Jesus knows he is talking to common people. You see, the common people would not have read the commandments. He did not say, you have read, okay? They would have been taught the commandments. Most of them would have been illiterate. He's referring here, they would have heard the teachings that were widely distributed. Who did that teaching of the people? The Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees. In essence, the worst of the society were telling common people how to live. But it was worse than today. Because back then, these were the ones in charge of society as well. So disobeying them wasn't equal to disobeying a pastor today. A pastor would say, don't shack up and screw around. Don't do drugs. Don't go drinking yourself stupid. But if people don't listen to pastors today, that's okay. In terms of the law, they just do what they want. But back then, if you disobeyed the Sanhedrin council, the Pharisees, scribes, and Sadducees, they were in charge of making legal decisions too. So it would be like breaking the law. Cops are going to come after you. They will find a way. And you know, these are very disgusting men. So they like the control and status, and they'll do whatever is necessary to make sure they have their control and status. Okay? They held a monopoly on the power and the common man suffered. This is part of a reason why many people in modern society like to see a separation of the church and state, meaning the church must not be the government. There should be two separate things. That's bad, by the way. However, a truly biblical ruler would be amazing for any country. If we think about it, a truly biblical ruler would be great for any country. The problem is, men are evil. Men don't want that, number one. And if we got churches in charge of the government today, the kind of churches we have, and I have no shame in saying this because I call them as corrupt. Most church leaders can't even follow the Bible. They're too busy focused on doing whatever they want in their whatever way they can. They make up their own stuff, okay? So they follow whatever rules they want. We actually had some news about that a short while ago. Those kinds of teachers of the law, the scribes, the Pharisees, Sadducees, Sanhedrin, they didn't give the full message. So here Jesus came to fulfill the law, as we saw earlier, him saying he came to fulfill the law, and he came to correct the straying that was in the teachers and their teachings. By stating it like this, you have heard. Jesus is using the same teaching methods that were practiced. They taught the past to guide the future. Now, this was said to those of old, right? Who were those of old? Who were the people that listened to the teachings of the rabbis in the synagogues that were established after the return from Babylon, back when Cyrus the Great released them? Jesus is talking to them, all right? These are the people of Israel who came back from exile, who would have been taught in synagogues that sprouted all over the place. Jesus starts the next verse with his authority. But I say to you, you have heard it. It was taught to you this, but I say to you. So we'll see a little bit of contradictions, apparent contradiction here, but we'll get to that in time. All right. When he says that, it sounds like he's going to say something new, but he's not. He's actually saying the same law. The difference is he's going to share it in its fullest quality. It may be easy to think that those of old, this piece in 21, those of old, it could refer to people back in Moses' times, people in the prophets' times, but Jesus didn't set up his discourse against the word of God. Okay, so he's not saying you have heard from Moses, but I am saying something different. No, he's saying you heard from your teachers, but I'm saying to you different from what your teachers were saying. But again, when I say different, he's not contradicting the law that they were taught. He's contradicting the man-made, man-twisted and corrupted version of what people were being taught. Okay, so he's not setting up a discord against the word of God. He's setting it up against the words of men, because Jesus didn't deny the Tanakh in any way. We can see clearly he went beyond the shortcut ways of obedience that the authorities were teaching. You see, they didn't even practice it anyways. They were quick to stone men and women when they had the chance. So they would have been committing murder themselves, not giving people a chance. Jesus said he didn't come to abolish the law anyways, and that was earlier. If you remember it up here, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law and the prophets. So he's not contradicting in any way. This verse is not referring to what they would have called the ancients. The ancients would have been the men of the Tanakh. Jameson Fawcett Brown calls synagogue teachers work perversions of the law. They were just straight up. They were teaching perversions, that the teachers were teaching perversions. You've heard it said, you shall not murder. Now we know this as a commandment, part of the Decalogue given in Exodus 20, verse 13, where it says, thou shalt not kill. The best translation is, you shall not murder. About 13 different translations give it like that. Others vary, but they're very close to that. The King James, which most of us grew up with, King James doesn't translate to our knowledge today because people like to nitpick when it's convenient. So reading the King James Version, thou shalt not kill, which is correct. Many people would say, oh, all killing is outlawed in the Bible. So don't kill the cows when you want to eat them. Don't kill criminals if they are evil and wicked and the state wants to kill them. No, no, don't do that. Thou shalt not kill. That's misusing scripture. The correct translation for a modern mind to understand is not thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit murder. That's what it really means. It's just in the King James language, when they read that, they understood it to mean thou shalt not murder. We wouldn't read it like that. Jews were taught that murder was an act and it was punishable. But anything else that was related to it, without being actual murder, was less in the eyes of the law. And the act of murder, I want you all to understand, the act of murder is not only prohibited as the only thing that's prohibited. The thoughts, the hatred, the jealousy, bitterness that lead to murder, they are also prohibited because the spirit of the law requires holiness. And there is no room for rage and bitterness in holy living. Meyer said that the disposition to murder is prohibited, meaning the mindset. Matthew Henry says rash anger is heart murder because you want to kill them from your heart. As we read it, whoever murders will be liable to judgment. I want to discuss this. This means murderers will face the local courts that Deuteronomy 16 verse 18 would have talked about. I'm not bringing that verse up, but that was the part of the law telling them set up smaller courts, local courts. So the high court wouldn't be bothered with every issue. The Greek root krisis means judgment, decision, condemnation, justice, etc. So krisis would be liable for judgment and justice. This judgment meant facing a council of, or a college of 7 judges. And they would have, those kinds of groups were found in many different cities in Israel. So they had their own local judge council, if you want, which was not the Sanhedrin council, because the Sanhedrin was in Jerusalem and only in Jerusalem. Albert Barnes said that the judgment of the lower court of the 7 men would be, it could be appealed at the Sanhedrin higher court. So just like our situation here in modern days, you have a judgment, you could appeal it in higher court. Let's run down to verse 22. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. Now, you notice there are several letters here. I just want to show you. Angry with his brother without cause. Some original manuscripts have that without cause. Whoever insults, this one, or says raka to his brother will be liable to the council. And then Gehenna, this is liable to hellfire. This is Gehenna. And we've done Gehenna, we've met Gehenna already. So it's okay when you read these to check in and see what those little letters mean. Jesus here is expounding on the spirit of the law, common S, the attitude of the law, the intention of the law. And he takes it to a previously unknown length in the society of the Jews. Ellicott refers to Matthew 7:28, where at the end of Jesus' teachings on the Mount, people were astonished. It literally says the people were shocked or people were astonished. Most writers believe that part of this astonishment was because Jesus taught with an authority that scribes did not show. The teachers, the scribes, Pharisees, whoever was teaching them, they would have been reading and sharing the works of Moses and the prophets. We know that. But they would have been doing it as if they were reading a textbook written by somebody else. Jesus was speaking about these laws as somebody who knew the writer, who knew the writer's truest intent. So it wasn't just some guy who read a book and says, hey, here's what the book says. This is a guy who knew the writer of it and knew what the writer intended and says, this is what you're supposed to do. Not, this is what the book says, this is what you're supposed to do. And of course, that's because Jesus himself was the writer, because God is one. The Holy Spirit authored the Bible, and all three parts of the Trinity are one. Now, Jesus here is saying the same thing in three different ways. Check it out. He's talking about anger, it leads to judgment. He's talking about insulting, and it would lead to the council. Then he talks about saying, you fool, being liable to hell. It's leading to hell. In the following verses, right, after that, Jesus is showing the crowds that anger is not the same as murder, but there is a connection, a causal relationship that may be seen between anger and murder. Jesus is saying that we must cut out the anger as it starts. We know here, we spoke about this a lot of times, not just with anger, with any temptation. We know that dwelling on any distraction or temptation in our lives, it will lead us to disobedience. And this is Jesus bringing that revolutionary perspective to the crowds because they would not have heard this before. We have the benefit of living after the Bible is completed and having teachers to teach us, so we understand. When I dwell on what people do to me, I'll get more angry. When I dwell on how bad my life is, I'll get more depressed. Don't dwell on it. Rejoice always. Focus on the Lord, his goodness and his mercy. Be grateful. Now, up to this point, people were judged by others for their acts. Jesus is reminding them and us that God knows the heart and he judges before the visible act, because the act itself is just the evil in our hearts that's manifest. God looks at the heart and he judges all as evil long before we actually do something evil. So let's not regard iniquity in our heart. This also tells us that that what we focus on directs our actions. No emotion of ours should ever control our behavior because it could lead us to disobey God. So you get too happy, you might do something dumb. Too angry, you do something dumb. Too sad, you do something dumb. Because when we let emotions control us, guess what? We ain't listening, we're not obeying. Jesus starts this off, but I say to you, as we mentioned before. Here he's dropping a contradiction on the people. Not a contradiction to the word, not a contradiction to the law. He is only going to contradict the limited words and actions of the corrupt teachers of the law and the prophets. Jesus here is speaking with authority as God, the Son who is declaring the whole will of God, the Father. So God the Son, Jesus, is declaring the will of God the Father. Now this follows on the previous verses you were told by teachers of the law and the introduction that we had. Now we're going to do the part about being angry and calling people a fool and insulting, right? The three different things Jesus pointed out. New word alert. New word alert. Disapprobation. We're going to meet that word. Disapprobation. Y'all, these commentators use some funny words. It's not always easy to follow. Disapprobation refers to a strong disapproval for immoral behavior. It carries a condemning tone. Strong disapproval for immoral behavior. So it's not like, oh, I don't like what they do. Strong disapproval means we all look at them and we don't just shake our heads. We want to get them for it because they're doing something so wrong. Albert Barnes discusses why humans have anger in the first place. Barnes said that we have anger to express our disapprobation of evil conduct. So many people get angry because disapprobation when there's evil conduct. Now, don't get me wrong. It doesn't have to actually be evil conduct. It's just in our minds, we perceive it to be evil conduct. That's why if you correct somebody, let's say you see somebody littering and you say, hey, stop littering. They will feel disapprobation to you because your conduct is evil to them. I'm littering. Why are you telling me not to litter? You're insulting my pride. You're insulting me. And their pride gets hurt. So they feel disapprobation to us too. That's wrong anyways, but we do get angry when we have disapprobation because of other people's evil conduct. The other thing Barnes said we get angry for is to defend ourselves when attacked. And that's a real one. Physical, emotional, with words. We get angry when we're attacked. Jesus himself got angry. So was Jesus sinning? Of course not. Jesus never sinned. This here is talking about unrighteous anger. So everyone who is unrighteously angry. It doesn't say unrighteously angry, but that's the context of the use of the word. Okay? This is an unholy hatred and bitterness in a person. And there are lots of people with that walking around in church and outside church. Okay? Some people who are saved may have it, but they are battling it because they know it's wrong. Some translations would have added that little C there, without a cause. So angry with a brother without a cause. That was inserted in some manuscripts to remind readers that being angry is not the sin. Being angry without justification for anger, that's the sin. Jesus used a culturally recognized word for you fool, well, for insulting. Here, this was raka. If we checked it earlier, you saw it, R-A-C-A, raka. The Greek root for it, raka, R-A-K-H-A, raka, raka. I can't even read Greek. Oh, wait, I don't speak Greek. Raka. It means fool, empty, empty-headed, worthless, etc. It was a severely offensive term when people spoke and used it, derogatory. Okay, so it wasn't just, hey, you fool. No, it was a really bad insult in their culture at that time. The hate behind the use of that word in that case is what matters. When we hate so strongly that it is a malignant and damaging word on another person, we're wrong. Sometimes we get hurt so bad we want our words to hurt them, and that's why we say hurtful things. That's why cursing is wrong. That kind of language would be used for the most hateful of emotions. And normalizing swearing, normalizing hateful language, means the heart of the speaker is full of hate and absolutely ungodly. Psalm 14:1 tells us that the fool doesn't believe in God. So calling a person a fool is a very harsh thing. In this, when we see brother, who is our brother? We should be able to figure out who's our brother. But just in case we can't, I went to the Greek root, which is adelphos. Adelphos means brother, member of the same religious community. So it's easy to think this means other Christians, but it isn't limited to Christian brothers, because in this verse, its use, Thea's Greek lexicon tells us its use means people who have the same ancestral father. Guess what? We all have the same ancestral father, Adam. Now, this is hard to accept because it's hard not to hate some people. And please don't think that you're so good. Me, I don't hate anybody. Yes, you do. Yes, you have. But you convince yourself that they deserve it, so you don't notice that you hate on people. The consequences of this kind of hate, I'm almost done. When we look at the consequences of the anger, the insult, and the fool, right? Calling them the hateful fool. That hate, what's the consequence? Being brought before the council meant the Sanhedrin Council, the highest court in Israel. If people didn't understand that, we can see an escalating nature of the consequence in the order that Jesus said as he went there. Now you do, because we'll see it. Judgment, then the council, and then hellfire. It gets worse each time, an escalating sequence. All right? The consequences of rage and hatred are severe. The hellfire that was referred to here is the same fire of Gehenna. We met Gehenna back in Bible study number 152. You can check that out for a short description. I won't go into all of that again. But I want to add something. In Gehenna, they used to sacrifice babies to Moloch, a demon. And how they sacrificed babies, they'd light a fire on light something on fire and then put babies in it. And when they screams, they put them into that fire and they die. To drown out the screams of the sacrificed babies, they'd play music really loud and drums really loudly so that they don't hear it. And I want to bring that up. We don't need that level of volume for any kind of music or entertainment or environment that we place ourselves in. Please consider that when you go to places. Because club scenes, loud places, you don't belong there. Because most times that things get loud would be places where they want to hype people up to worship demons. All right. Josiah the king, he went and he desecrated Gehenna to ensure that the practices would never happen again. Josiah the king did a lot of good for the nation of Israel. Jameson Fawcett Brown emphasizes that two of the terms here may seem earthly because of judgment and the council, but the full meaning of the consequences is the divine retribution, because all sin is sin against God. All sin is disobedience against God, and all sin therefore earns eternal damnation. The conclusion to all of this in verse 21 and 22 so far, we must understand that any slight annoyance can grow into such a hatred that, well, it can grow into a hatred if we leave it unattended. If we just let it do what it does in our heads. If we dwell on it whenever we are sour and we're in a bad mood, we just go back to all the bad things. It will grow into hatred. Jesus was telling us that the slightest insignificant emotion may lead us to eternal damnation. So don't let moments get us into a mode of hell-bound thinking. Rejoice always. We're told to rejoice always. If we're rejoicing, we can't be hating. Think about that. There are a lot of descriptions of the council in the commentary page of this, and a lot of descriptions of the use of hate and Gehenna. So if you want to get more details on those, you can check them out, but they are outside the scope of our work because we are studying all of Matthew. We're going with what they mean and moving on. I'm stopping here at the end of verse 22. God willing, we will get to 23 next week. And this is the end here of 40 Days Bible Study number 185 on April 1st, 2025 again. This was Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and 22. The 59th, sorry, if I said the wrong number earlier, 59th episode in our Matthew Bible study. So we thank you all who are watching on Facebook and YouTube for being here and sharing with us. God willing, we'd like to produce our 60th in the study series next week. Bye-bye.